Welcome to our Living Stones podcast, where we gather to discuss all matters of faith and life as members of God's household. In a world that often leaves us feeling fragmented and disconnected, our hope is that Living Stones will help to further connect us as we pursue the Lord together. I'm your host, Davina, and today we have the privilege of having one of our very members of our church and one of our ministry directors as well, our children's ministry director, Michelle Hwang, here to share her testimony. So welcome, Michelle.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Nice. Michelle and I, we've actually been friends for a long time now.
Yeah, it's been over 10 years now.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Yeah, I remember I was here when she started coming out, I guess 10 years ago.
Yes.
And then from there, she has blossomed and grown and now is so vital to our children's ministry. So I'm so excited for you to be here.
Pebbles Ministry.
Pebbles Ministry.
So I'm a Pebbles Ministry director.
Oh, I still consider that children's ministry. I guess not.
I guess that is, I guess it falls under the children.
Under like all of the children, but not specifically like the older children.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Pebbles Ministry. Can you share a little bit about yourself, a little bit of background?
Yeah. So my name is Michelle, for those who don't know me, and I'm married to Abe, who is a deacon at our church, and I have 3 children named Micah, Adeline, and Audrey. I've been attending Cornerstone since 2014, and I guess I grew up here because I was just dating Abe at the time.
That's true. You were just dating at the time. How long have you been the Pebbles Ministry director?
2 years now, so I'll be going into my 3rd year.
All right. Well, you can start anytime you want and share your testimony.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone. So I was born on January 2nd, 1993, and my parents actually immigrated. I guess I'll start with my parents since they kind of led me to where I am today too. But my parents immigrated to the States from Korea in the 1970s. So they're 1.5 generation. And so they basically grew up here for half of their childhood, I would say. My grandparents worked hard making a living in the United States. And as my parents grew older, they kind of took on, that kind of lifestyle and started working hard, providing for me and my brother. So I have one younger brother who's about 2 years younger than me. So growing up, I just remember my dad being the sole breadwinner. That was a decision that my mom and dad made to have my mom at home while my dad works, so that because they really valued that they wanted a parent home when me and my brother got home from school. So my dad worked hard. He worked many hours. He was a police officer for Arlington County. So he was very busy. He worked probably easily 10, 12, even sometimes 16-hour shifts just to provide for the family. Cops don't make that much money, so I feel like he was putting extra hours in just to make ends meet at times. And then my mom was home cooking, cleaning, and just watching over me and my brother.
What area did you grow up in?
I was born and raised in Northern Virginia my whole life.
Like Fairfax?
Fairfax.
Oh,
I was
literally.
I was in probably Arlington, Burke, Fairfax, and Centerville throughout my childhood. Yeah. I grew up with my parents being just, the gender roles were very just unintentionally very clear in the house. My dad was he had a very strong personality, very masculine and hard-headed, I would say. And my mom was a lot more naturally submissive, slow to speak, slow to anger, and just a good listener. She was just a lot more gentle in spirit. And so that's what I grew up with. And my parents I also grew up in a very conservative background with biblical values. At the time, I didn't really know, since I don't consider having grown up in the church, but the biblical values and church was still kind of something within our house, but not fully. And I can go into that more. But I guess the first time I recall hearing the gospel or hearing about Jesus was with my aunt. I would have sleepovers at my aunt's house because I also had cousins. And we were all very close growing up. So she would have me over and she would just read me Bible stories. And I just soaked it all in. Like, I didn't question it. I still remember just being so intrigued and so curious and having questions about the Bible. And I'm pretty sure I was in, primary elementary school. And I just remember my aunt also telling my parents, like, she has this curiosity for the gospel. And so it kind of just left, it was just left there at the time. And I think I just went to church occasionally on holidays. That's kind of how I grew up though. And so, but still, I was expected to, obey, follow directions and.
Strong conservative father.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, military, or he did have a military background in law enforcement. So that's kind of the background I grew up in. And then I guess I would go into middle school. That's when I started becoming extremely competitive and involved in Taekwondo. I started Taekwondo in elementary school, just hoping to, get healthy because I was a little overweight as a kid. And so my parents just wanted me to do something active. And I was a shy kid, actually, very shy, quiet, timid. And so they kind of wanted to help me grow more confident too. And so I would say during my middle school years is really when my personality also kind of changed. I became a lot more outgoing, more outspoken, and something that just started as something to become healthy ended up becoming something that I became very competitive with. And I would say throughout my middle school years, it was pretty much my whole life. I competed regionally and then eventually nationally.
Wow.
And
what degree black belt?
second degree.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's impressive.
And so because Taekwondo was such a big part of my life and the sport itself requires you to watch or have a lot of, weigh-ins during competitions. During my puberty years, I was cutting 10, 15 pounds just to meet weight class. And that was really hard. That was really hard on hard on me physically, but also mentally.
As a middle schooler.
Yeah. And I think that it did contribute to me eventually growing to have a little bit of an eating disorder that kind of carried on into high school. But in the beginning, I was very competitive. And I just remember one time having to cut 10 pounds in 3 days and wearing these sauna suits, running around the parking lot. It was intense.
Just to try to understand the Taekwondo world when it gets that competitive, when you say that you had to meet a certain weight for I guess a weight class. Is it just to be able to fight within because you wanted to fight in that weight class, or was that what your instructor told you?
So it's kind of like boxing. It's more advantageous for me to compete in a lower weight division since the girls will be shorter or smaller. And so that would be an advantage to me. And so everyone's cutting weight. And I just remember sometimes going against these really tall Caucasian girls who are, I don't know how they weigh so little. But if I were to just compete at the original weight that I was at, I would be fighting much bigger girls.
I see.
And that was a disadvantage.
Jeez. So from a very young age, being mindful of weight and the pressure of weight literally weighed on you.
Yes. And at the time, I didn't know anything about nutrition or diet or health. So I remember thinking that eating a Pop-Tart is going to make me gain less weight than an apple because it physically weighed less.
Wow.
I didn't know better. My parents really tried to help me through the weight cutting process, but I didn't, during your puberty years, you're sensitive. You don't want to take advice from your parents. So I tried to do it on my own. And there was one specific competition where I had to lose 10 pounds and my parents and I were fighting about it. It was just a very mentally exhausting time period. And so I told them, I got it. Just don't worry about it. I got it. But instead they said, okay, fine. We're going to trust you to do it. And they did. And I was lying to them the whole time, just telling them I'm going to cut the weight. And I didn't. And so 3 days before the competition, we're at Taekwondo training and they can tell my weight's not coming off, but they really want to trust me. And so there was a weigh-in in front of everyone at the Tojang, which is, the place that I train at. And my weight didn't go down. So they were embarrassed. They were angry. And we went home that night. And the first thing my dad said to me is, he was yelling. He's like, I did not raise a liar. He was really angry. And so at that time I had to make a decision. And he said, I'm here to support you, but I'm not supporting somebody who lied. And I had to explain to him that I'm sorry. The weight cutting was something that I had to do, but I think I just pushed it off, thinking that it'll somehow just miraculously come off. And that was in middle school. So
man, that's a lot of pressure.
It was a lot. But at the end of the day, my mom asked me, are you going to do it or are you going to quit? You have to make a decision now. But if you make a decision, you need to follow through with it. And so that evening, I talked with my dad and I told him I'm sorry, and I decided to go with it. And that's when I had to lose the 10 pounds in 3 days.
Jeez.
I would never recommend it to anyone, especially as a child. But I mean, those were all just if looking back, they were all very good learning experiences. All my friends that I've met at Taekwondo, it's hard to keep in touch daily or regularly now, but they're all still just so dear to me. We literally sweat blood and tears together. So that's going to stay forever. So that's kind of what, my middle school entailed. And then
A lot of competition, a lot of discipline, a lot of competition, a lot of probably even like a growing awareness of like your body. Yeah.
Yeah. And then that kind of transitioned me into high school where, puberty is still a thing. And as your body's changing, I was also gaining weight. But because I think I had an unintentional way of thinking when it came to weight. So as my body was naturally packing on the weight that I needed, I had a hard time accepting that. And so that's when I really started kind of seeking excessive exercise and then eventually laxative pills as an easy way to kind of let everything out, hoping that I would lose weight. It wasn't very successful in the weight loss, but I felt better thinking that I was emptying myself. And so that kind of became an addiction that I had, I would say, for maybe 2 years throughout high school. I was taking, a few pills, and then it became larger amounts of pills because my body was getting used to, the pills. So then my intake would increase. And eventually it kind of actually naturally just dwindled down. I think going into college, because it wasn't throughout all of high school that I struggled with it, but I think it was on and off. And going to college, I didn't have access to a weight scale. I didn't have money. So getting access to these pills just weren't easy. And then just being with friends all the time also helped me keep my mind off of my weight. And so that's also God's grace that I was able to kind of be free from that. Thankfully, not thankfully, but my parents, I don't think really knew what I was struggling with during that time. And I'm sure if I were to ask them now, they definitely wouldn't put us in any weight-bearing sports as children. Looking back, they still feel really bad about it, but I don't regret any of it. I mean, we learned so much from it. I just know what I would not do for my children now.
Yeah, for sure.
But high school, so that's also when I started attending church regularly. It was a small Baptist church here in Centerville, actually. I remember my mom sitting me and my brother down one time and just asking us or telling us that she felt really sorry. And I was like, this is an awkward conversation. But she sat down and told us, I regret not raising you guys up in the church regularly, and I really want to let you guys choose to do so. And I said, sure, like, I'm fine with it. I didn't have any qualms about it. My dad at the time wasn't attending church, and we never really talked about it face to face, but I do believe that it's because he was hurt by the church at some point in time, because I knew that my parents met at church. But growing up, he wasn't faithfully attending. So I did have questions about it, never really asked him about it. But I know that was kind of the reason why my brother and I didn't grow up going to church regularly. But since I was in high school and my brother was in middle school at the time, I think my mom felt that this was a good time for us to choose on our own accord whether we wanted to attend regularly. So that's when we started attending a church at the time called Eternal Baptist Church. And that's when I would say, met the Lord. There was no divine one-time encounter or anything, but I just started serving faithfully, regularly, getting involved in praise team, cleaning the cafeteria, dance ministry. I mean, just kind of dabbling into a little bit of everything. So that's when church life really began for me. And then I would say college. I guess college happened. I went to college in 2011, and I was again still
Oh, what school did you go to, by the way? Is it Virginia Tech?
Yeah, as you can see, I went to Virginia Tech.
What did you major in?
Human development. I thought I was going to become a nurse or a teacher, but that didn't happen. And I will go into that a little later.
Yeah.
But I went to college. I was still a very young Christian, very hungry, very eager to learn, very eager to grow. And so I was seeking to find a fellowship pretty much immediately when I got into college. And so that's when I began attending Cornerstone Christian Fellowship, CCF. It's part of Servants Ministry. And yeah, I was meeting friends and growing, but what happened was I started also dating my freshman year, And that relationship went on for about 2 years, from about freshman and sophomore year. I also would not recommend dating freshman year of college because I think that's just a really crucial time when you can be meeting friends and getting to know your college, peers and the campus. But I was too involved in my first serious relationship. I learned a lot from that, but that didn't work out. So,
I mean, yeah, because you're married to Abe.
yeah. So that's what happened. But I would say because I had my first true heartbreak during that relationship. I think I also didn't know how to handle that hardship at the time. And so I grew kind of bitter at, the whole fellowship itself, thinking that they were judging me or everyone was just I felt that legalistic vibe from the ministry. And I wouldn't say that was the ministry's fault. I think that because I was just going through my personal struggles at the time, I had a hard time really, truly opening up and getting extremely involved and plugged into the fellowship because I was so involved with a relationship at the time.
So you started your freshman year. You were introduced to CCF, and then you started dating, and then you said that you felt judged or a certain way about CCF. Was it because while you were dating, or because you broke up, or why did you feel that way?
I would say the relationship itself was very probably unhealthy, and so people looking in from the outside just had a lot of things to comment on or say.
I see.
And so
it either wasn't nice,
right, and you either get defensive or you feel what's the word, misunderstood, or just a bunch of little things. And so you're in college, so that's kind of what happened. And I was still part of CCF for all 4 years though. And so after that relationship ended, I was taking a break from dating. That's what we do in college. And then in 2013 is when I was going into my junior year. So summer of 2013, I was going into my junior year of college. The church that I've been attending since high school was closing down. So I started going out to another church called Global Mission Church. And that's when I really got to know Abe. I met Abe my freshman year of college just through some mutual friends at the time, but we only became Facebook friends and we were acquaintances at best. After I started going to the church, I noticed that him and his brother were there. They grew up at that church. And so...
Yeah, I met you at that church.
Yeah, we did. Because you were serving at a retreat.
Yeah. I was playing keys and singing.
Yeah, I remember that. And so that's when we met, got to know each other over the summer. I was getting to know a bunch of people since it was a new church for me. So I was serving actually pretty early on. And then right before going back into my junior year at Tech, Abe pulled me aside and said, hey, let's hang out before you go back. I said, okay, we can all hang out as a group, but I think he meant something different. I didn't know at the time. Long story short, he pulled me aside and he basically asked me to reconsider him from being friend zoned. I don't know how he knew that he was friend zoned, but he did. And so he asked me to reconsider it. And, I will say I was very taken aback because usually I have some intuition, or in Korean nunchi, when somebody might be interested in somebody, but I really didn't see this one coming. And usually a guy would flirt or kind of get to know the girl very outwardly. He didn't do that at all. So all through summer I was just doing my own thing, and we weren't even that close. And so when he told me he had feelings for me and he wanted to pursue something long lasting, is what he said. So will you reconsider me from being friend zoned? As much as I never considered it, I just couldn't say no on the spot. So I just said, thank you for your honesty and your courage. I don't know you the way that you seem to know me, because he was, naming some things about me. So I said, let's just get to know each other as friends and go from there.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to make sure I was guarding his heart, making sure I'm not leading him on. So I told him, while we're getting to know each other, I don't want you to think that, I like you. So I made the boundaries very clear. I will let you know if feelings are reciprocated, but otherwise, the best I can do for you is just get to know you. And if there's nothing that happens after that, then
we tried.
We tried. Yeah. And I asked him, do you want to set a timeline or just get to know? And he said, I'll just wait. And so
he got his foot in the door.
Yeah. So, I just really appreciated the fact that he wasn't one of those guys that had to know that the girl liked him back before confessing his feelings. I thought that was really big of him. And it didn't take long. I think within 2 months, we were already official in our relationship. When you get to know Abe, he's a very likable guy.
He is. Everyone loves Abe. Right, Abe?
Is he here?
He's here.
Okay, so that happened. And then, so we started dating in October of 2013. And I kind of joke around and I tell him, like, that's kind of, I feel like, when all my struggles in life really started. In November of 2013, I was driving home from school, going home for Thanksgiving break, if I remember correctly. And my dad called me and he said, hey, are you on your way home? And I said, yes. And he said, well, when you get home, I'm not going to be home. And I was like, what? And he said, your mom and I have some issues. None of it's your fault, but we just need to take some time away. So I won't be home, but we can talk more in detail later. So basically, he left the house and I took that very hard. I don't think I realized how hard I took it at that moment. But I just remember feeling like the whole world was kind of like spinning and I was just driving. I guess going back, I forgot to mention, I think growing up, my dad was just like the view that I had of my dad was just this perfect being, just this perfect father who could do no wrong. He was like my rock. Even during my Taekwondo days, I just tried harder when he was there watching me during practice. I wanted to impress him. I wanted to make sure that he was pleased with me. My mom was somebody that I definitely just found more comfort in. And she was a friend that I talked to about everything. But when it came to my dad, he was someone that I just really respected. He could do no wrong. And so when I saw this side of my dad, I didn't know how to process the emotions and just everything that was going on with it. I remember that my mom was just, I remember seeing her crying and her clinging on to the marriage. And my way of coping, I think, was just not being present for her. I didn't want to be the middleman or kind of be her support system. I felt awkward, I think, doing so as her daughter.
That's a tough space to be, though.
Right, and being kind of in between their marriage. So I think I just spent more time out with Abe or just friends. I remember my dad trying to come visit me at school, talking to me, and I didn't let him. I didn't give him the time of my day to explain, like to hear him out on what he needed to say. And looking back, I feel really bad. And I think over the years, I've grown more sympathetic or just understanding that he's not perfect. Don't get me wrong. My dad is an amazing person and he is seriously just a great father, a husband. But because of just realizing that he himself is not perfect as a human being and that marriage itself is not easy, and kind of realizing that and coming into perspective with who he truly is also helped me to grow in my spiritual walk with God and kind of put more of my identity in him, knowing that he is my perfect father. And so that transition kind of, I think, really happened for me in college during this hard time. And as I was able to find more of my security in Christ, I think I was able to forgive my dad more too, and just be a lot more understanding with that fact that, like, hardships in life is not really just black and white all the time.
Yeah.
So that happened in 2013. In 2014 is when Abe and I came to Cornerstone, which is our church right now. And that's when I think we were checking out a bunch of other churches at the time. What really pulled us into Cornerstone was Pastor Paul. I think a lot of people would agree. His messages are solid. We grew in our theology. I learned what Reformed theology was. And I just knew that this was a church where we can it was a solid biblical church. And so that really helped us to make a decision to commit to Cornerstone. And I think we started, that was 2014. And then 2015 is when I was now a senior. I was a senior in college.
Oh my gosh, you were still in college when you came to Cornerstone?
Yeah, I was a junior, I think. End of my junior year.
That's right, because Abe did come by himself for a while. Okay, that makes sense.
He was coming by himself while I was at school. But we still found the church together, I think in the summertime or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
And then 2015 came. That's when I was a senior. And I got a call from my mom. And so I forgot to mention too, but she has had 3 heart surgeries now, but at the time she's had 2 major heart surgeries. She had one in her college years, I think, to replace one of her valves, and then she had to get a second one done after my brother was born. And so that was supposed to be her last surgery, but in 2015, the cardiologist told her that one of her valves were leaking. So I don't know too much of the medical terms or the whole issues with the heart, but I know that she did a third procedure. And so at the time, my dad still wasn't home. I felt a lot of pressure to kind of be there for her. And it was a little overwhelming, but my mom said, she had a lot of hope and high spirits before going to the surgery. And what was supposed to be a 4-hour surgery ended up becoming a 20-hour surgery. There was a lot of complications that came with it. I remember being at school. My dad was he was still there for her. So, one thing that, again, my dad, and that also shows about his character is, even though their marriage wasn't doing well, he was still financially and just fully there to support for my mom and for me and my brother. And so he was still there at the hospital to support her through this. And I remember driving up from Virginia Tech to go see my mom after the 20-hour procedure. I know the doctor said that they almost couldn't attach the valve back on her heart.
Oh, wow.
But they didn't give up on her. And so they spent 20 hours, and I will forever be thankful for them.
Yeah.
But they weren't able to close her heart back up because there was so much swelling, bleeding. I think she was in a coma for like 2 weeks afterwards. And so during this whole time, her life was, I felt like, in jeopardy. We weren't sure what was exactly going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also a situation I would say God really used to restore my parents' marriage. Because I remember going to the hospital and my dad sitting there, and we just kind of had a small heart-to-heart at the time. And I told him, you don't need to be here. Don't pity her. I got it. So I'll take care of her. Like, you don't need to be here for her. Just go do what you're doing. And I was kind of defensive.
Yeah.
I was not, again, at the time, ready to fully be there for him. But that's when he really explained that sometimes you almost, lose something before you realize what you've almost lost. And so I'm just really I'm condensing the conversation, but that's kind of what we talked about. And literally since then, he has never left her side. Like, for those 2-3 weeks or about a month that we were at the hospital, he would not go home to take a shower.
Wow.
And I would say this is also a time when my faith was challenged, and I was growing in my faith. As I would say, this is probably the first experience where I really felt like I had no control of the situation, and I had to trust in the Lord. By God's grace, and my mom is healthy today, and it was a long recovery period, but I respect her for that too, because she's just so strong. I mean, she's went through 3 heart surgeries, and she's had a few more other procedures since then too, but
Wow.
she's went through a lot. And so 2015 was a big year, and then I graduated college, and then soon after that, Abe proposed. We were engaged in October of 2015, and then we were married in 2016, April. So I guess 2016 and marriage brings me to some other struggles that I had with in-laws. Abe's parents are very Korean, I guess, in their culture. And looking back, I feel like I can see things in a little bit bigger perspective. But at the time, I didn't understand. They didn't approve of me. And I didn't understand why. Because, for me, I had expectations going into this marriage with, 2 families are coming to become one. And I really wanted to have a very close-knit relationship with my mother-in-law. But looking back, I think, so my mother-in-law, she immigrated when she was 30.
Oh, okay.
So that was quite some, that's a lot older. And so she didn't know a lick of English. She married my father-in-law, came to the States, and gave birth to 2 sons. And so that's her whole world. And Abe being the firstborn child, and him being, the golden child, I would say, honestly, he was so talented and everything, and so good to his mom growing up. Mm-hmm. I really feel like she probably felt like she was losing like a piece of her.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if I knew that at the time, I think I would have taken everything a little less personally. But I was also just only 23 when I got married. And so things were pretty hard, I would say, in my in-law relationship. That also kind of seeped into affecting our marriage life for the first year. Praise God. My relationship with them now, after many years of struggle and prayer and back and forth, things are a lot better now. And so it's pleasant to see them, and we have a good relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that time too, Michelle. I remember that time, fast forward to even today. And I know that, like, when people share their life stories, there are lots of like micro events, like many of them that don't get shared because we want to protect our families, right, and we want to protect our marriage. And so I understand that. However, I would say that from my perspective, like watching this part of your story, this relationship, this ever-growing relationship with you and your in-laws, I have grown to really respect you during that time, because I feel like for us, like millennials, we, especially if we're like kind of born and raised here, like you're 100% Nova Indian. It's a thing for us to, when we get married, when we become our own family, grow our own family, it's not only easy to do your own thing, but it's almost like a given. I feel like in this day and age in America, living the American dream, being independent, like to go off in that route, it's very natural to do it. Everyone else is doing it. However, when I watched you, and maybe it's because like you were so tight with your family that you fought for even it, like for Abe and Abe's family. Like it was so important for you to keep everyone together. And at times when it was really hard for you, when you could have given up, I still saw you. Like, sure, like you probably did have moments of weakness, but overall, like you never gave up on loving your in-laws and pursuing your in-laws. And like now, yeah, I see like even at like, I didn't go to the last tour, but for Adeline's tour, like the relationship is completely transformed from maybe what it was in the beginning. So just in my perspective, like I've seen the growth, and it's like, it's incredible what God has done through you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think something that also kept me going was, like you said, I feel like our millennial Gen Z generation tends to think, oh, our parents don't understand our generation. You know, our parents don't understand us. But sometimes I think it's also important that we understand them. I think it goes both ways.
Yeah.
And as much as I wanted them to understand me, I tried really hard to understand where she was coming from or where he was coming from. Now, I wouldn't say that all the struggles that we had were just cultural. It definitely wasn't, because I'm very aware of the Korean culture and how they operate. And I would not say that all of the struggles we had was due to culture. However, I know that a lot of it rooted in just the way of thinking.
Right.
What they consider to be okay might be unacceptable to us. And so navigating through those differences. And I think and I'm not, praising myself when I say this, but like I do value family a lot. And I think the fact that the reason why I was able to persevere and continue to pursue a relationship with them was ultimately because of my love for Abe.
Yeah.
And our future children at the time.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be the person or the source of, severing their relationship with my in-laws. And I would say, it's not easy to change when you are in your 60s.
Yeah.
But my in-laws have changed a lot. And that's not easy to do. So I know that they're trying on their end too.
Yeah. It's just this beautiful kind of coming together for both sides from where it was in the beginning to now. So for like your friends of the church, and for like me, like we've seen your journey in it, and it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then that brings me to 2017. And that's when Micah was born. He was born August 11th, 2017. I was just 24 years old. After being married, I was planning on going back to nursing school. I was debating between teaching and nursing. I eventually chose nursing. And I was like literally getting ready to do prerequisites to go back to school for a master's degree. Instead, I got pregnant unexpectedly. I think I found out I was pregnant with Micah on my 24th birthday. So I found out on my birthday, and I just remember feeling shook. Like literally, I was so shocked because it was not what we were expecting. It was not part of my plan. And I was nervous. I wasn't ready for what motherhood was going to entail, right? Felt very young. I was very young.
You were?
I was very young. But after throughout the pregnancy, I've grown to become very excited. He is the biggest unexpected blessing in my life. And I just remember like holding him for the first time, looking at him and bringing him home. And everyone always told me like, you're going to have to sacrifice so much as a mother. But I just remember feeling like whatever I have sacrificed, I just feel like I've gained so much more. So I was like, what are these people talking about? Like, it was just love at first sight. And so experiencing that whole new realm of love for this child, I think that is when I just really my heart started growing. I think it started expanding. My perspective of just this world started changing. And that's when my first thought and my heart for adoption started growing. Now, I really thought it was postpartum emotions, hormones, and just me being overly, sentimental at the time. But at the time, I remember just talking to Abe and said, hey, we love him so much. Like, why? I think I have the heart to, bring home another child and love on them too, an orphan. And so he was kind of shocked, at my comment. But he said he would pray about it. It was nothing that we were deciding to do anytime soon. So that was just kind of left on standby or just on hold. And then we just moved on with life from there. And then in December of 2019 is when Adeline was born, our second child. Actually, with both of my pregnancies, during the 10-week mark during the pregnancy, I did an NIPT testing, which is just a blood draw. And the reason why I did it was because insurance covered it at the time. And I really wanted to just know the gender of our baby. I couldn't wait till 20 weeks. And so during that blood test, I remember getting a call from genetic team or office, and they said, hey, you need to come into the lab right now. Your daughter is at high risk for trisomy 13. And I just remember thinking, what? Like, what are you saying? I was just waiting for a call to hear about the gender of my baby, and you're telling me all this gibberish. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what trisomy 13 is. Thankfully, my mom was home at the time with Micah. And so I just told her, hey, I got a scary phone call. I just need to go to the lab, so I'll be back. Abe was at work at the time, so I don't remember being able to contact him easily, but I think I tried to keep him updated. So I went to the lab, and they were trying to explain to me that the blood results came back positive that Adeline had trisomy 13, which is a rare form of genetic condition. It's called Petiu syndrome. It's a rare genetic condition caused by an extra copy of chromosome 13. It affects how the face, brain, heart develops along with other internal organs. Symptoms are life-threatening and in many cases result in miscarriage or infant mortality before the age of 1. So that's what Google says. I just remember thinking, okay, like there's no family history of like, what are the chances of this happening to us? And so at the time, the doctors were really giving me information overload. And I just remember thinking, okay, I was just trying to like kind of seep it all in. And then at the time, they actually encouraged me to do something called CVS testing, which is called chorionic villus sampling. And that's another procedure to get another second test result of the positive result that I already got with the blood work. And so at the time, I went through with it, thinking that this is the only option I have. And so the preliminary result to that CVS test is called a FISH test. And so that came out positive. And so that only confirmed the scare that we had. And then the CVS test after that came out negative. So, okay.
Which test was it?
So after the second test was called chorionic villus sampling, which is known as CVS test. And so that what they do is they basically poke a needle in your abdomen and get some DNA from your placenta. And so that's how they're able to test if your baby's affected with trisomy 13. And a preliminary result that comes out from the CVS result is called a FISH test. And so the CVS test takes about a week for the results to come out, but the FISH test takes about 3 days. And so they said that they're 99.9%, accurate of each other. You just get both results. And so we got the result for the FISH test first, and the results came out positive. Even though that's the news that we got, even with the NIPT blood work, just hearing that the second time only confirmed that she indeed has trisomy 13. And so during those days, at that point, we were kind of forced to accept the results of her health condition. And before the CVS test came out, which was about 4 days later, I would say those 4 days of processing has probably been some of the hardest days of my life. And for the whole 9 months, I would say it was just a very hard and sanctifying situation. I remember actually sitting down with you and Sangsup talking about the results that we got the first time. We were devastated. And to be completely honest, I wasn't ready to submit to God with what he's handing me. I just remember feeling so desperate. I remember reaching out to the church through Facebook, asking for prayer. Our church has been there for us through so many ups and downs, and I'm just so thankful to Cornerstone for that. Yeah, we were just really desperate for prayers. I didn't know why God was, doing this to us at the time. I remember praying and telling him, I'm not submitting to the story you have written out for me. So I just pray that you make her healthy. You know, we have no risks. We don't carry these genetic risks in our family. So I don't know why you're doing this to us. That's kind of how my prayer started. And I remember you, Davina, actually sharing with me a quote that sticks with me to this day. You said, I realize that the deepest spiritual lessons are not learned by us having our way in the end, but by Him making us wait, bearing with us in love and patience until we're able to honestly pray what He taught His disciples to pray, Thy will be done. And I think in the beginning when you told me that, I was just praying throughout the entire pregnancy. I just said, okay, God, your will be done. But I don't think I really understood the depth and the meaning of what that actually meant. And deep inside, I was actually just praying for God, but please make her healthy. That's kind of what I was really praying, researching more about trisomy, becoming more informed. And, you know, the thought of having to shop for your own child's casket while you're pregnant, knowing that this genetic condition is not viable, that was probably one of the hardest things I had to endure. I was 26 at the time. I don't honestly just don't have words as to how hard this was.
Yeah.
And I would say by God's grace, during those 9 months, my prayer life has honestly transformed. And I would say, I think that's genuinely why God put us through this, to really help us grow and sanctify us. Because by the end of the 9 months, I mean, I've prayed in my closet for hours on end, desperately pleading with Him. But in the end, the only joy I had and just feeling of that security, like, and the genuine joy in the midst of hardships, is something that can only come from the Lord. Thanks to God, Abe and I had that. Oh, and I forgot to add, after that fish test and the CVS test happened, because of the discrepancy in the test results, the doctors actually said, oh, we'll go through with one more testing before you decide to terminate. That's kind of that was their narrative. And they almost assumed that based on the test results, we would terminate our pregnancy. I was very upset. I was very defensive. The other test that they were suggesting to us was called amniocentesis. And this is when you get DNA from the baby itself inside the womb. So it's a little bit more invasive of a procedure. Looking back, I probably wouldn't have done the CVS test that the doctors were giving me at the time. But because I was called into the lab, given information overload, and then they said, this is the next step, I went with it. But with the amniocentesis, I had a few weeks to consider it. And by then, Abe and I were caught up on things together, and we've had discussions and conversations. And so even during this time, my emotions were kind of driving me to try to make decisions, thinking, okay, the doctor said amniocentesis, so we need to go through with it. The catch is there is about a 1 in 200 chance of a miscarriage during this procedure.
Oh my gosh.
And later I found out that the CVS test also carried similar miscarriage risks. I didn't know it at the time, because if I knew it at the time, I probably would not have gone through with it. But with this amniocentesis, even then, you know, when you're so blinded by the struggle and you feel like the best thing you can do is have certainty and know in your situation, you know, I feel like many of us struggle with control issues and just wanting to know. And so that's what I was going through. And I just said, okay, since there's a discrepancy in this test result, let's go through with the amniocentesis. And that's when Abe, my husband, was saying, why? Like, why? Like, is this going to change anything? Is the results of the test going to change whether we decide to keep or terminate the pregnancy? And I said, of course not, but we should still know. And I really appreciate Abe, because that's when he said, no, we're going to trust God in the unknowing.
Wow.
And we're not going to go through with amniocentesis, and we're going to just continue to trust God, and we don't have to know because God knows.
Wow. Nice, Abe.
And so that was pretty much what you saw of him.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate.
You married well.
Yes, I did. At the time, I wanted to fight back, but I knew what he said was the right thing. And so he basically challenged us to continue and pray throughout the 9 months, not knowing exactly what Adeline was going to be like. And so that's when, you know, I mean, we were praying for good health, but we were also at a point towards the end of the pregnancy where, you know, we had joy that only comes from the Lord. Mm-hmm. It was unexplainable. And in the end, I think we were just very excited to meet her. And I think that during those prayers, I was just so concerned that the world would not be able to see her the way that I see her. Because to me, she is a beautiful daughter. And I told God, and she is that for you, even more so. So I knew that his hands were going to be upon her. And whether she had, a minute here on this earth or 100 years, we just submitted to God and asked him to use her for his glory. And I know that her story has encouraged many people so far. And so what more can we ask for?
Yeah.
And so Adeline was born on December 11th. And I remember going into the hospital, because of the pregnancy being high risk, we were driving to the hospital and I was induced. And yeah, Abe and I just sat in the car quietly driving to the hospital. I don't think many words were shared because I think we both knew that everything was going to be okay. And there was joy through the uncertainty. And so that was hard, but that was sanctifying and that was rewarding. Adeline was born and she is healthier than ever.
It's crazy how
right.
there's no trisomy. There's nothing like that in her, and yet all the tests said that.
Yeah. So I think Abe and I tried so hard at one point to try to make sense of all of this through biology and science, but it doesn't make sense. It's really God.
It's supernatural.
It's supernatural. She is literally our miracle child, and
she's a normal baby. I mean, she's funny like Abe.
Yeah.
She's quirky like Abe.
She has a huge personality.
But yeah, completely healthy little
Spunky.
girl. Yeah.
And so that was a huge, learning opportunity for us. And so after her, that's, we were just busy raising 2 toddlers, 2 babies. And then in 2021 is when I carry a genetic mutation called BRCA1. BRCA1 is a gene mutation that increases a woman's risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer.
Mm.
So just a little backstory about in the general population, every woman carries about a 13% chance of breast cancer in her lifetime. But for me, I found out that my chances were close to 80%.
Oh my gosh.
And then for ovarian cancer, an average woman's risk in her lifetime is about 1%, and mine was up to 40-50%. And so finding out about this whole news was another shocker. The only reason why I found out was because my mom had testing done and she came out positive. She had testing done because my maternal aunt had breast cancer in her early 30s. And so my mom was a candidate to get tested. Hers came out positive. So then I got tested. I think I found out about this when I was about 28 years old. And so I was given information about how I can either prevent or at least in our humanness do the most we can to help prevent cancer, or just kind of run tests biannually, so about twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the time I was receiving ultrasound scans about twice a year. But somewhere in 2021, quickly found a mass in my breast. And so I was freaking out a little bit, thinking, oh my goodness, I just found out about my BRCA1 mutation and now they have found a mass in my breast. Thankfully, it was benign. There was nothing suspicious about it. But that got me thinking about the future, and me being only 28, I had many more years ahead that, Lord willing, I want to be here, especially for the children. Mm-hmm. And so Abe and I had to make a big decision of how we wanted to handle this. And so I could have continued to just go through with ultrasound scans every 6 months, or I could have done a prophylactic double mastectomy, which is a preventative surgery to remove my breast tissue, and that would reduce my chance of breast cancer to about probably 5%, so less than the average population. It was a pretty difficult decision, but looking at the children, I really felt like I was a ticking time bomb. I know that cancer is not guaranteed, but because of the risks not being in my favor, I felt that the wisest decision would be for me to go through with the surgery. And I did. It was a pretty big surgery, and I would say that my biggest reason and my why as to why I did it would be for the kids. I wanted to be around, and I just remember thinking I might not be able to, bake fancy cakes for them on their birthdays or do all these fancy things for them, but I'm willing to get rid of my breasts. And so I did.
Be alive for them.
Right.
Be present for them.
I want to be there for them.
Right.
And so that was in 2021. And I would say that physically, I was just so busy recovering that I didn't have a lot of time to process or think about the surgery and what just happened. But I would say that the emotional and mental processing came about a year afterwards. That's when I think I kind of started really struggling with what just really happened. I mean, I am a woman, and just that part of me being gone and being a little bit different was hard to accept, a little bit hard to process. But in the end, I think it gave me perspective that life is fragile, and I'm just thankful to be here today.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful that there's medical professionals who were able to walk alongside me with these preventative breast cancer, risks and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another cross that I'm carrying, to this day is what I want to do about my ovaries in the future.
Yeah.
The breast is something that could have just been removed, but the ovaries would affect, hormones. And so that's something that I may consider maybe like later in my 30s or 40s.
Yeah.
So that was just another lesson that God has taught me to trust him in the uncertainties while doing our best to live out his calling faithfully. So that was 2021. And then in 2022, well, I would say, so rewind a little bit, but after Adeline was born, shortly after, we knew that we wanted to continue growing our family.
Mm-hmm.
And this time, after much prayer and thought, Abe and I were on the same page, and we decided to proceed with adoption to grow our family. And so the process started in 2020, right around COVID. And I would say the whole entire process was about a 2 to 3 year process. 2020 is when we started the process, and end of 2022 is when we went to Korea. So in 2020 we started the process. 2021 we received a match, and so
And you went through surgery.
yes. So
Crazy.
I went through surgery. I forget if that was. I think that was after we received our match. So we decided at the time to adopt from South Korea. We felt that was the right decision for our family, as there was a lot of things to consider when it comes to culture and race. And so we proceeded with South Korean international adoption through Holt. And there's a lot of paperwork, home study, and this whole period, it's about a 2-year process. And I remember, we were trying to save money for the adoption, which costed about 60, 70 grand total. And so we moved in with my parents at the time, trying to save some extra money to pay for the adoption. And I just remember just being so thankful for the church and the amount of support we received from like the whole church community and our family and our friends around us. And then, so after we received our match in 2021, it was a little girl, and her name was Ayur. And she was about 1 year old at the time that we got matched. From the time that we were matched, we received updates about her and her development, getting updates about her physical, mental, emotional, cognitive, all aspects of her development. And we're seeing pictures of her. And she's a part of our family at this point. We're praying for her. And so we've been keeping up with her through the agency for about a year until they told us that it's time to bring her home. And so in December of 2022 is when we traveled to Korea. And before all of this, Abe and I had a sit-down conversation about, our capacity and what extent we are willing to adopt and how open we are to the child's needs. And so we agreed that adoption in itself is already a huge layer to the family and to the child. And so at the time, having 2 young ones at home also felt that for us to meet the needs of her, the adopted child, we wanted to bring home a child relatively healthy. The updates were, telling us just that. And then when we went to Korea to meet her, within first 5 minutes, Abe and I knew that something was off. It didn't take us long to realize that she wasn't the child that we were meeting face to face, and the child that was described on all the different forms and paperwork that we received was very different. There was no accuracy of the results that we've received. And so we had a lot of concerns during that first meeting. And then we brought up the concerns to the agency, and they denied all of it. They said, she's fine. I don't want to go into too much detail about the red flags that we've noticed, but after that, Abe and I had to, sit down and figure out, okay, what's going to happen. We trusted the agency because we had no reason not to trust them. And so we decided to bring her home. We were with her in Korea for about 8 days. And that's when I would say our lives were really tested. Her birth mother had a history of smoking and abusing alcohol. And then she also seemed, again, this is not diagnosed in Korea at the time, but it was evident that she had a very high level of cognitive impairment and maybe even autism. And so during this time, Abe and I didn't know how to meet her needs. I would probably say it's probably the hardest thing that we've ever gone through in our marriage. She had needs that we were not ready for. And so looking back, I feel like people, I don't expect our church or people around us to understand what we went through. I don't think, to be honest, anyone will be able to understand what we went through. But when we were trying to bring her home or bring her back to our hotel, and she had so much needs that we were not ready for, I think we realized it's not that she can't fit into our lifestyle. We didn't know how to meet her needs and to give her what she needed to thrive. And I think that's the first time I really felt like I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's kind of how I felt at the time. We were talking to Pastor Paul, we were talking to Pastor Jacob, and trying to seek counsel of how we have to go about this whole situation. And after that, we came home. We left Ayu with the physical custody of Holt at the time, trying to come home and figure out the legal documents of what needed to happen, because at this point there was talks about terminating the adoption. That was not natural for me, for Abe, for none of us. We were not expecting or planning any of this. And so when we got back home, I think the whole process was taking another few months, but during that time I had enough time to kind of sit back, research, find help, therapies. I was talking to adoptive parents all over the country, trying to find the resources that I can and to equip myself and to learn everything I can about her potential needs so that we can bring her home and raise her and meet all of her needs well. And so I was taking like 2-hour walks on the phone, talking to like so many different people. And so during this time, I was praying, and I basically came and told Abe, I think I want to bring her home. I think we can do this. It's not something that we've expected. I think that this is something that we can handle. And so our marriage was, very rocky at the time. We weren't on the same page. And so that was making our marriage life very difficult. And as a mother of 2 young ones already, to not bring home a child because of special needs is kind of, I felt like how the outside world would have perceived it. And even for me, I felt it was the most unnatural thing to not bring her home after knowing her and loving her for a year. And so when Abe and I were not on the same page, I started to resent him. I started to grow bitter at him. And we were just fighting like all the time. And I didn't understand Abe at the time of why his decision was a firm no. I really truly believed that that's because he wasn't willing to take on challenge, or that he wasn't open to, special needs or whatever it was, to just kind of make him look like the bad guy. And I wanted to feel like, okay, I want to bring her home, but you don't. So why is that? So that's kind of how I was trying to cope with it initially. After enough prayer and more thoughts, my mom also reminded me, hey, Ayu is somebody that we've been praying for years now. And whether it be you guys that raise her or somebody else, we know that God's going to continue to be with her. And so you need to trust that. I remember thinking, okay, God, why am I going through this? I want to bring her home. We can raise her. We can do it all through you. And Abe's not on the same page. And that's when I really just remember being reminded, before you try to do something seemingly so wonderful or so beautiful in the eyes of others by bringing home a child with needs, your first and foremost calling before that is to submit to your husband. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like even harder to do. Like I couldn't wrap my head around it. But in the end, I knew that that's what I had to do, because I knew that I think during that time, I felt like I was trying to just bring her home and raise her on my own. I was kind of leaving Abe out of the picture. And I felt like, I'll just take care of her. You're going to be at work. I got this. But that's when I realized I was putting our marriage on the back burner just so that I can bring her home and raise her, because that's what I wanted to do. And I think there was a part of me that wanted to please the audience and the people around us too. But
when you knew that you didn't want to do it anymore?
no, I still wanted to bring her. And no matter what, I wanted to make it work. We were thinking about the finances. We were thinking about logistics. I was talking to every special needs adoptive family out there.
Yeah. So what I don't understand is, what do you mean by pleasing the audience?
I felt like if we didn't bring her, I was scared about the judgment that was going to come on to us by people, like just the community around us. And when you're going through something so hard, not only do you feel misunderstood, people kind of act like they know, or they are quick to judge and say things that are insensitive. And as much as there were like 99% of everyone around us who were so supportive of us, not because the situation was ideal, but just because they're there for us. And then they admit, we don't fully understand what you guys are going through, but we are here for you. And those words and those encouragement and the people that's just been sticking through by our side are people I will never forget. To this day, it brings me to tears, honestly. But at the same time, when you just hear maybe one or two voices that maybe the far from truth, or just something that's a little discouraging, it kind of just stings louder than any other encouraging words at the time. And so I just remember during that season just feeling I wanted to feel understood, but I know that I couldn't.
Yeah.
Because it's a very unique situation. I know that in some people's eyes, it might be like, oh, they just didn't bring her home because she had special needs. But it wasn't that simple. I eventually grew to understand Abe's perspective. And I think that's the gift about marriage too. Like, we function so differently and we think so differently, and we were able to bounce off of each other. And looking back, Abe, at the end of the day, he was doing what he was called to do, which is to protect his family. He wanted to protect the marriage first, and then our children. And that doesn't just mean protecting Micah and Adeline at the time. That also meant protecting Ayur, because it's not that we had a fear. I mean, of course, there may be some fear, but it's not that we didn't want to bring her home because of our lifestyle changing to meet her needs. It was more so we didn't have the confidence or the knowledge to meet her needs, because we knew that we so wanted her home, but we knew that with the younger two at home and with her, we just didn't have the knowledge at the time. And of course, with the amount of research, therapies and everything, we really wanted to make it work. But at the end of the day, Abe said, I know you're capable, Michelle, but we have a capacity too. And, not everyone has to agree. So think people will not ever fully understand. And I actually think that it was very humble of him to admit that, because I think that's hard for most people to do, to kind of stay in your lane or kind of know what my limit is, right? And so to this day, it's something that I'm grieving and I'm still processing. Probably never going to leave. It's something that I'm going to probably walk with forever and think about her. And we pray for her. That's a decision that he came to. And I don't even want to say that he came to. It's a decision that we came to, because, we're together in this. And so even after that whole thing happened and I've grown to understand his perspective, I don't think that the resentment that I felt towards him was resolved immediately. I think there was still something that I was holding on to inside, was thinking, just if his mind was different or his decision was different, then maybe she would be here with us today. And so that kind of way of thinking was not healthy for me and for our marriage. But he's admitted to me, he said, I'm sorry that, I feel like I've, stopped or like limited your ability to reach your calling to adopt, or like, you have such a big heart to want to, bring home, Ayur and all these things. But, I feel like I limited you. And I said, oh my goodness, like maybe that's what I was really feeling this whole time. But in the end, I think this has actually challenged me to remember, like, God doesn't want, like, he doesn't need us to do like the big things. Like, adoption is a beautiful thing. But I don't think I would necessarily put an expectation on every Christian out there to adopt.
Of course.
But at the time, I realized I was putting an expectation on my husband, just because he's my husband, to adopt, but also to bring home a child with special needs. And adoption in itself is already such a big layer to add on to a family.
Sure. Yeah.
And every family, I believe, has a capacity. And I think my husband at the time made the decision that he felt was healthiest for us, but also for her. And because he wanted her to also meet a family that can meet her needs best. A year went by, and I think I was, still grieving, and I didn't know how to talk about it with people.
Yeah.
Because it's, again, such a unique situation. And I finally come to terms with the fact that people may not fully understand, and they don't have to. And I don't have to necessarily be, understood at the level that I initially wanted to. But instead, I'm just really thankful that our Heavenly Father knows. He understands. And the fact that our community is still, here for us and praying for us and walking alongside us has been more than we can ask for. So we're thankful for that. And honestly, if people have questions about this adoption, I would really appreciate them, just come and ask me about it, because I'm very open to talk about it. But I think I can sense that sometimes it's hard for people to bring up.
Because it's so sensitive.
It's sensitive.
It's sensitive because we're talking about this child that both of you have prayed for and invested in for so long. And everyone knew that this wasn't the plan. This is not what you guys started off to do. I think for sure it got really messy. Even in my perspective, watching you guys go through it, there was so much excitement, and then there was massive confusion. And then ultimately, I remember even sitting in your house, we were just you can't do what you can't do, right? So that's a decision that both of you made. And the reason why I bring up the whole audience thing is because just, again, as your friend, as much as I know that it definitely could draw lots of insecurities about what other people can think, because again, this is a big deal, right? We're talking about adoption of a child. At the same time, as you said, there is a reason for everything. And at the same time, I agree with Abe that he was watching out for you. He was watching out for your marriage. He was watching out for the whole family. He was looking at it holistically. Mm-hmm. And yet your heart for Ayur was also not wrong. It was just a really hard situation.
Right.
So there was going to be a million opinions. And then ultimately you just have to let those people go. It's just going to happen, right? You can't control what people think no matter what. But for sure, I think it was just a really tricky and messy situation. And again, as you said, your church is here with you and going to continue to support you.
Right.
Even if they don't understand, sometimes that's part of friendship too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just want to make it clear that, with us and our decision, it was not us, rejecting Ayu because of her needs. It was actually more so us wanting to learn how to love her better by helping her find a family that can meet her needs just so much better, because we struggled at the time to find it in us. We didn't know, we weren't equipped, and we weren't knowledgeable enough to know how to look at this world with her lens. Yeah. And that's something that, I actually think I've grown to understand more now, even though she's not here with us. Yeah. Even with the Adeline situation, and then with his adoption situation, I have several families who have children with special needs, and I would argue I probably understand a lot more than just an average person. Yeah. And my heart is for the special needs community is huge now. I mean, I don't think I'll ever be the same after what we've been through. Yeah. But, because there's also so much that we don't know, we're just so open to learning and wanting to grow with these families. And we'll continue to be praying for Ayu for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. Honestly, I really appreciate you even talking so much into this, because I know it's still really painful. And as you said, it may be for the rest of your life. And so it was really brave of you to share. But again, I just want to encourage you that your friends from the beginning are still here with you today. And like at least within Cornerstone, you do have a church family and a community that supports you guys no matter what.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. So shortly after the adoption, even during the midst of that hardship, we still knew that we wanted to grow our family. And so that's another thing that kind of transitions into my pregnancy with Audrey. It happened shortly after we came back from Korea. I know we don't have to prove, anything to anyone. Don't want people to think that this pregnancy was, in replacement of the adoption failing. And so those are kind of things that we struggled with. Audrey is, her own being. We're so thankful for her. It's just a completely separate chapter that actually helped us, I think, move on and kind of, I don't know about finding closure, but it still helped us still move on just a little bit, from
some level of healing.
Right. From everything that we went through with the trauma with the whole adoption process.
Mm-hmm.
But even during that pregnancy, I think I still struggled with feeling just even the tiniest bit of guilt or feeling, again, just mixed feelings. I'm so excited for what's to come, but also I couldn't just shake off the grieving that I was having about the whole adoption process.
Yeah.
And then during this time, I'm just going to get emotional, but during this time is when a friend reminded me, I was in good hands, but also God knew Audrey before he even created her in your womb. Like, God has known her since before Genesis. Like, he has created her in his image and before life even began, like before this world even began. Hearing that and being reminded of that, just really, I think that those words really helped me to just kind of separate the two events of the adoption, but also my pregnancy with Audrey. And it kind of gave me the freedom to remember that I can celebrate her for who she is, and actually be so thankful that that new chapter of Audrey coming into our lives also brought some healing. Yeah, that's kind of how, Audrey was conceived and she was born December of 2023. And so we just celebrated her tol last month. And that's kind of where we are at now. I'm thankful for her and her life. And I'm mothering 3 children, serving in Cornerstone.
Mm-hmm.
And just I guess my life now is, I pray that God will continue to work in me.
Yeah.
And thank God that he's not done with me yet. And so I guess I would say that, after everything that I've been through, even though it may not seem like it at the time, I know that he's the author over my life. And it's just so much better that way than me trying to write out my own story. So I may not always understand or know why I'm going through what I am, but I'm just always so thankful and trusting in his promises to us.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Michelle. I mean, again, just the last 10 years of knowing you, like, I know that your life has kind of been riddled with like lots of trials and hardships and a lot of learning and a lot of sanctification. And half jokingly, I'm just like, the reason why sometimes some of us experience a little more than others is because it makes heaven a little more attractive, than living in this earth and going through all our trials. But no, like, I'm honestly, like, those things, it shapes us. It shapes us to not only be better people, but to be like people that actually can appreciate God more in the life that we have. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you guys see her, give her a hug at church.
Thank you, everyone.
As we come to the end of this episode, we hope that you've been blessed by Michelle's story of sanctification, of God's grace in her life. And we hope that you continue to find encouragement through her and other members of our church. If you found value in today's episode, we hope that you'll share it with others. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. We are members of God's household, united by our shared faith in the Lord and in the desire to grow with one another. So until next time, may God's grace and peace be with you all.